literature and online resources for the secondary classroom. I'm so excited that all of you were able to join us here today. My name is Liz Howes. I am a program director here at Primary Source. And I had recently changed to a consultant for global programs, and I'm working remotely, like many of you joining from out of state or at least out of town. I'm here this afternoon with my colleague, Jennifer Hansen, who is Primary Source's librarian and webmaster. And we're both really excited to join you for today's webinar to think about how we can bring South Asia to our students. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of things that might help you enjoy the webinar a little bit more, especially looking at that control panel that shows up on your screen. If you've participated in a past Primary Source program, you might notice that things look a little bit different, and that's because we've changed to a new platform called Collaborate. It has some new features that we'll be exploring over the course of the next year, and we hope that you really enjoy it. As we mentioned a few times, if you haven't checked your audio yet, you can do this by clicking on the audio wizard at the top of your control panel. You can see that little red box at the top there with the audio video. So you'll just click on that and follow the prompts if you want to make sure that your mic and speakers are working correctly. We want to make sure you can hear if you'd like to later speak with us. We invite you to submit questions throughout the webinar as they come to you, either about the resources we're discussing or about different things that come up throughout the course of the session. You can submit your questions using that chat supervised box down there. Jennifer and I, if it's something that we can address at the moment, we'll take turns addressing those. And if it's a question that we think the whole group would like to hear, we could speak to that at the end. We are reserving some time for Q&A, so during that time, we'll either address questions that were sent in the text box, or you can also speak your questions to us. If you'd like to do that, you can reserve your question and raise your hand. There's that third red box you see there, and there's a little hand that you can click on. That will let us know that you have a question. We'll call on you to ask your question, and in order to speak and have everyone hear you, you'll click on the talk button. And when you're done answering or asking your questions, just click on that talk button again, and we'll address your question. So again, we'll go over those directions at the end, but please do feel free to jot down questions or to send those to us throughout the session as they come up. And now I think we'd like to go ahead and move into the heart of the session. We're thrilled to see so many people interested in teaching about South Asia and in learning about high-quality online and text resources. And we'd like to say a huge thank you to the South Asia Institute at Harvard University. Without their support, this webinar wouldn't be possible and it wouldn't be freely available to you. So we always enjoy working with the South Asia Institute, and so much of our South Asia programming is done with cooperation and sponsorship from them. So we do want to acknowledge them and thank them. For those of you who aren't familiar with Primary Source, I just want to tell you a little bit about our organization before we get to the heart of the webinar. Primary Source is a nonprofit organization located just outside Boston that educates K-12 teachers about world histories, cultures, and global issues. We offer graduate courses, workshops, and study tours that bring global perspectives to K-12 classrooms across New England and the United States, and through online programs like this and our online courses, of which we're offering more and more, we're able to reach educators and like-minded members around the world. As you know, today's webinar is going to focus on South Asia, but we also offer programs that give teachers background knowledge and pedagogical strategies for teaching about Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, as well as the United States. In addition to that, we offer numerous courses and workshops that support globally minded classrooms that encompass world regions and topics that really connect across the globe, such as the environment or human rights. We also have a 7,000-piece library and growing online curriculum collection, both of which we'll speak about today, as well as a wealth of international education resources for schools. Joining us today, you are one of 2,500 educators who participate in our online and face-to-face programs each year. And through your work with us and then your work with your students, over 200,000 students benefit from Primary Source's work annually. You can learn more about us, the programs we offer, and upcoming events by visiting our website. The URL is right there at the bottom of the screen. It's just www.primarysource.org. And throughout the webinar, you'll notice that you can't click on the links that show up on your screen. So we'll be sure to share those links with you in the comment section, in the chat section, so that you can click on them there and you'll have those for your reference. In our time today, Jennifer and I hope to share both resources and teaching ideas for introducing South Asia to your students. And in just a second, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, and she'll be sharing some of her favorite online resources as well as some of her favorite books and text resources for teaching about South Asia in the secondary classroom. When Jennifer's done, I'll speak to you a little bit and introduce you to some free online primary source-based activities that have been created to help students explore India, its industrialization, and the environment. And these activities not only are great for teaching current events and global news and kind of the impact of economic growth, but also they really do meet the Common Core standards and were created with those standards in mind. So we'll have some time at the end, as I said, for Q&A, but feel free to share questions either for Jennifer or for me at any time using that chat box. And now, Jennifer, I think I'll turn it over to you. I think they're probably ready to get to the resources.
Thanks, Liz. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to have you join us today for looking at some resources for teaching about India in your classroom. The first resource that I wanted to share with you is our resource guide on South Asia. And I just put the link to this in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. On this resource guide, you can see right now I just have a screenshot. There is a page with children and young adult books, films, nonfiction books for the classroom, curriculum materials, materials on art, music, and dance. And there's a page on South Asia in the news that pulls in news feeds from all over the world. On this resource guide, you will find a number of resources that you can use both to increase your own knowledge about India and South Asia and to use with your students in the classroom. And the resources that I'm going to be talking about today are resources that you can find on this guide. We just wanted to point out that the guide does exist. This is where we update anytime we get new materials in the library or we find out about a new wonderful resource. We try to make sure that it gets onto our resource guides as quickly as possible. I'm going to start off by talking about a few pieces of literature that I think are really great for the secondary classroom. We have about 5 books to look at and a couple of websites, and then Liz is going to talk about some teaching ideas for teaching about India. So the first book that I wanted to start with is called Climbing the Stairs by Padma Venkataraman. Padma actually lives in Rhode Island. She grew up in India but is now in Rhode Island. We used this book in our book group here at Primary Source a few years ago, and the teachers absolutely loved it. Climbing the Stairs follows a young girl named Vidya. She's 15, and the book is set in India in 1941. So this is just as World War II is you know, kind of going full strength. And the book explores violence and nonviolence. It looks at India's role in World War II. It looks at women, class, caste issues. There's a lot of different themes that you could examine using this book with your students. It's great for students 6th grade and up, especially those middle grades, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. This would be a really fantastic book. At the beginning of the book, Vidya's father is protesting in a nonviolent march and is injured and becomes brain damaged. And so Vidya and her family have to move. They move to Bombay. They're currently living in Madras, currently known as Chennai, and they have to move to Bombay to live with her father's family. So you can imagine that Vidya's family, they're much more modern in their life in Madras. Moving to Bombay, they have to live with her father's family and adhere to a more traditional family. So the girls, the women, don't really get to see, she doesn't get to see her father or her brother very much. She has to do, you know, whatever is told and obey the grandparents in the house. And as I said, it's a wonderful examination of both violence and nonviolence in India, but especially looking at women and women's issues in the 1940s in India. My favorite part of this book is that 2 of the main characters are named Venkat and Raman from the author's last name, which I didn't catch on to until very late into the book. But I think it's just kind of fun how she used her name to name 2 of her main characters. Second book I want to talk about is Secret Keeper by Matali Perkins. Secret Keeper is for a little bit older audience, maybe 7th grade and up. This follows two young girls and their mother, Asha and Rita, which is short for Amrita, and their mother. They have to leave Delhi and move in with their father's family in Calcutta. So we see kind of a similar theme here. This book, however, is set in the 1970s, and Asha and Rita's father has lost his job. During this time in India, there was a lot of turbulence politically and socially. Their father loses his job there's been a lot of strikes, and so he's lost his job. And he goes to the United States to try to find work. And the objective is to have his girls and wife move in with his family while he's looking for work. And then they're expecting this telegram of, I found a job, come to New York, and they would be reunited with the father. Unfortunately, though, the father passes away while he's in New York, and so the family must stay in Calcutta with the father's family. And so you see throughout the book how, the father's death affects the children. It talks a lot about, the youngest daughter, the oldest daughter who has to get married first, looks again at issues of women in India, this time in the 1970s, class and caste issues as well, and of course the politics and social life of India. The next book that I wanted to talk about is more appropriate for high school. This is possibly one of my new favorite series. Anyone who knows me knows that I have talked about this series of mysteries. I have probably bored all of my coworkers talking about this, but this is a fantastic mystery series by Tarquin Hall. He is a British journalist. He lives in India for about 6 months of the year and in London for 6 months of the year. He's married to an Indian woman. And he has started writing this series of mysteries. So the first mystery in his series is called The Case of the Missing Servant, from the files of Vish Puri, most private investigator. And Vish Puri is our Indian Sherlock Holmes. And this is just a wonderful series to look at modern India, contemporary issues, that push and pull of tradition and modernity. The books are primarily set in Delhi, but in solving his mysteries, Vish Puri typically goes outside of Delhi to, gather clues, interview possible suspects, and things like that. So in the case of the missing servant, the servant of a lawyer's family goes missing, and they only know her first name, Mary. And they don't know where she's from, they don't know a last name, they knew nothing else about her. And so Vish Puri only has her first name to go on. They assume that she is murdered, and so it's up to him to determine, was she murdered, is she still alive, if so, where is she? And again, as I said, this is great at looking at contemporary issues in Delhi, at the social life, tradition, modernity. Vish Puri himself is very traditional, and has some very interesting commentary on more modern aspects of Indian society. The second book in this case, in this series, is The Case of the Man Who Died Laughing. And the third book in this series is The Case of the Deadly Butter Chicken. All of these would be great for high school students, probably 11th and 12th grade. They're pretty quick reads, very enjoyable. I think mystery is a great way that you can learn about cultures and different social life and customs in different societies. The next book I wanted to talk about is a little bit more serious than The Case of the Missing Servant. This one is Partitions by Amit Majmudar. Partitions begins the day of partition in 1947, in August of 1947. And so the book begins basically that morning, and it follows twin Hindu boys, a young Sikh girl, and a Muslim doctor as they try to make their way. The boys are leaving Pakistan to get to India. The Sikh girl and the Muslim doctor are fleeing India, trying to get to Pakistan. And this novel is examining all of their experiences. I had an Indian scholar of literature who said this is quite possibly one of the most realistic, the fact that it's fiction, she said this could be nonfiction. These stories are so real. She has done a lot of research on partition and particularly women's experiences of partition, and she said, this is a novel, but these stories could absolutely be true. It's a heart-rending book. I would definitely recommend it for more mature readers, and 11th, 12th grade probably. But it is such an interesting look at this event that happened in 1947 that continues to affect that region today. And the next book I wanted to talk about is a work of nonfiction. You've probably heard of Behind the Beautiful Forevers. It was a 2012 National Book Award winner. Catherine Boo, I wouldn't say lived with, but studied, interviewed, and experienced the lives of residents of the Anawani slum in Mumbai for 3 years. And her book is looking at these people who live in this area of Mumbai. It's described as being, next to huge modern hotels, luxury hotels, in the shadows of the Mumbai airport. And it's just how these people survive, how they're raising their families in this slum, how their hopes, their dreams, what they want to do, what they do for work. It's a great examination of, that dichotomy of poverty and wealth, also of looking at the global economy and how it affects, everyone, rich or poor. And I'm seeing several people have said that they've just read this, so that's fantastic. If you're thinking about using this with students, I think you could probably use excerpts with middle schoolers, excerpts with high school. High school students could probably pretty easily read this. It's a fantastic work of nonfiction. If you haven't read it, I would highly encourage you to get this one from your library soon. And then the next resource that I wanted to talk about is a documentary from PBS Wide Angle. This is called The Soul of India, and it was filmed in 2002 when there was a lot of violence in the Gujarati area of India between Hindus and Muslims. So it's looking at this particular point in time of violence among Hindus and Muslims. But it also looks more historically at India as a secular nation, and it's it's not just looking at this violence between two religious groups, but it's really exploring India as a democracy, as a secular nation, as embracing religious pluralism, and what that means as religious groups. As you kind of have some religious groups experiencing violence among each other. The website is listed here, and Liz has put the link in the chat box. You'll get the recording of this, and we will also in that email send you any links that we referenced today. On the PBS website, you can find additional interviews, a photo gallery, more information about this film. You can also watch the full episode online. It's about 1 hour. And the nice part of having it online, the episode is broken up into sections. So you can actually, you can just watch a little clip with your class if you want to, or you could watch the entire film. There's also a nice timeline of Indian history that is available on this website. So it kind of puts into context what's happening at the early part of the 20th century there. And the last resource that I'm going to talk about today is a TED Talk by Shashi Tharoor. He is the author of The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone, which looks at India as an emerging power in the 21st century. His TED Talk, again, it's about 12 to 15 minutes. It's a fascinating TED Talk. He looks at India not as a powerhouse of military strength, but India's soft power and what that means for India and how that influences the world. So he is looking at the spread of Indian culture, food, music, dance, art throughout the world, and how that that spread of soft power, makes India a superpower, not, as I said, because of their military might, but because of their cultural richness. And this is, as I said, it's about 12 to 15 minutes long, so this is great, that you could use with students to think about, what India in the 21st century and what that means on the world stage. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz now, and when she's finished, we'll have a little period of Q&A. If you have any questions, you can always type them in the chat box while Liz is talking to you.
Great, thanks Jennifer, and it was fun to follow along in that chat box. It looks like some of those resources are familiar to people and some of them are new, so hopefully you'll enjoy exploring those. And I'm ready to introduce you to a few other online resources that I hope you'll take some time to look at. Some of you might be familiar with our Primary Source World resource, but I'd love to introduce it to you. And the URL to visit it is right at the top of the page, and Jennifer will probably type that in for you as well. This is an online free resource full of activities on global topics that are specifically for educators and for teachers. As you can see, there are many topics covered here. I actually don't have the full, I couldn't get a screenshot with the full screen, but many countries, many topics here, and each topic and each collection of resources, each cluster I guess you could call it, includes all the supporting information that you and your students need to explore topics that are either misunderstood or not often taught. And there are these activities created around primary sources and key informational text. The one we'll be looking at today, you can see the arrow there, the South Asia or India cluster focuses on the environment and the effects of India's rapid industrialization. And the rationale for choosing this as a topic was that teachers who joined us for a tour in 2011 to India were blown away by how we hear so much about the industrialization and the economic boom in India, but we don't always hear about the effects of that on humans or on the environment. So that's just an example. This entire collection was created to explore some issues that maybe aren't touched on as much in our news, in our classrooms, and in various curriculums. So we'll be looking, of course, at the India example today, but there are lots of other topics covered. And although the resources that we'll look at are for the middle school and secondary classrooms, if you were to look through this website, you'd find lots of other clusters looking at things with elementary students in mind. The arts of China, daily life in Japan, and cultural preservation in Africa were all created for lower grades. So I'm actually going to go ahead and share my desktop with you, and if you'll just bear with me for a moment, sometimes there's a little bit of a lag time. And what I'll be opening up is a website that Jennifer will share with you, and it's basically the what would happen if you clicked on that India curriculum cluster. So just give me a moment as the program allows us to start this application sharing. It's taking its time right now. Let's see, it's going quite slow. Here we go. All right, so it might take a moment to pop up on your screen, but when you do click on that Human Environmental Interactions in India link on the Primary Source World main page that I just showed you, you'll be taken to the home page of the cluster. And this is what the home page looks like. You can see that on this page there are tabs for navigating through the different activities, and there are also samples of each of the primary sources that will be explored in the activities. And for each of these clusters of activities, we include the rationale because we do want you to know the reasoning behind the inclusion of this topic and why we think it's important for you to teach and for students to learn about. So each cluster kind of has the same format, so once you get familiarized with them, it's a little bit easier for you to explore. And you'll see that there's a tab here called Background Essay, and by clicking on this first tab, you'll actually access a scholar-authored background essay that was created specifically for this cluster, focusing on human-environmental interactions in India. And for this essay, we had Michael Fisher of Oberlin College, who not only wrote the essay, but also vetted all of the resources and activities for balance and accuracy, so that you can teach using these lessons and the ideas and the resources, knowing that they're scholar-approved and that they're really high quality. So the essay here could be used either for your own background before you teach this, lessons from this activity, or you could use this with your students if you felt like they could read at this level. It's a little bit higher level than some of the other readings included in this. On this page, you'll also find a multimedia piece. This is if you want to enhance the learning, either as an assignment for students or as an extension for your own teaching. In this case, it's a Google Earth tour that looks at some of the Indian activists who are working to address different environmental issues. You can just download this Google Earth document here and then explore the tour that we've created. Other activity clusters include documentary clips, podcasts, and other multimedia resources. But each activity does have a multimedia piece. For right now, I'm going to skip over these middle three tabs and jump to this Further Resources tab, because I think this is probably a feature that a lot of people don't explore, but it's really worth taking a look at. In this section, we highlight online and print resources related to each of the topics covered in the cluster's activities. And each resource in this section has not only been approved by the scholar for this section, but also by our librarian, Jennifer, whom you just heard from, to make sure that it's accurate, up to date, and it's something that you should really feel comfortable sharing with your students or referring your students to. So now I think we'll just go ahead and dig into these activities. I'll be posing some questions that we would be asking of students, and please feel free to use that chat box, and I'm going to take a quick look at it now just to see if there is anything going on there that I can address. But you can, feel free to shout out answers virtually as I go through and kind of explain how we would use this with students. This first activity focuses on coal mining and indigenous populations in India. And the primary source featured here is coal mining legislation, so a bill that specifically deals with the scheduled tribes or the indigenous populations in India and how they're supposed to be treated. And what you can see as I scroll down the page here is that there are common features for each of the three activities in the cluster. Not only do we show the primary source, but we provide some background information that's specifically tailored for your student level, although this might be something you choose to hold and just share with your students in a lecture format. Each activity also contains some key questions to frame the conversation, terms that are important for your students to know before and during the exercise. I think one of the greatest features is this document section, where we have each handout or piece of information that you'll need for your students to engage with, we have available to download right there. So it's kind of a one-stop place. You can just dig in from the beginning. And then, of course, each activity has a pre-learning activity to activate student knowledge and engage them around the topic, a primary source activity that really helps them dig into the featured primary source, and then an extension activity that allows you to either come up with thoughtful homework assignments or perhaps add an extra day onto your class time that you're devoting to this activity. So I just want to describe to you a little bit about how primary source is trying to bring up this issue of coal mining and the treatment of the indigenous people, and how we think your students might engage with a primary source such as a piece of legislation, which really is a high quality, dense, difficult, challenging sometimes informational text to use. So this is what we envision for your students. And the pre-learning activity, for this activity, students start to explore the tensions that exist between economic development, human rights, and environmental protection by kind of explaining or indicating, by getting up and moving around the classroom, where they stand on a number of statements about the proper role of the government in regulating environmental issues. And again, if you were to go up to that documents box, you could open up this Where Do You Stand worksheet. And this contains a series of prompts that the teacher would read aloud, and the students would be able to move around the classroom to different corners to indicate if they agree or disagree with each of these statements. And again, this is just kind of a way to prepare the students to better engage with the primary source activity, in which they'll be thinking not only about the role of the government more generally, but they'll specifically be looking at legislation and thinking about what India's government has committed to via legislation versus what's happening on the ground. So after that pre-learning activity, they'll move into the primary source activity, and they'll be doing a close reading of environmental legislation, excerpts of which we've prepared for that document. So again, rather than handing them the entire text of the legislation, students would actually look at this document that you can download, and it's already been excerpted and made a little bit more approachable so that this informational text isn't quite as overwhelming while it is still challenging. And so they'll look at this legislation, and they'll also watch a video, a documentary, that details coal mining and its effects on indigenous peoples in the Jharkhand, which is in northern India. And after exploring these resources to learn about the pros and cons of coal mining and how it affects India's people and its environment, the students will complete a simulation activity in which they'll take on the role of either representatives from a coal company or from the Adivasi or indigenous communities, and they'll try to broker a compromise, trying to meet the requirements as laid out in the law while still supporting this economic boom that is necessitating an increased use of energy and coal. So we really like this activity, not only because it uses a high-quality, dense informational text in an approachable way, but because it also asks students to pull evidence from a multitude of resources, to speak and to write persuasively, and of course to collaborate and work with other classmates to come to some type of conclusion or decision. And as you know, many of these are the skills that are really important to the Common Core and those state standards. We offer 3 different extension opportunities for this activity that could either be used in part or in whole as a classroom assignment. And the first one is that students could learn about the assassination of an activist who was murdered on behalf of her work for the Adivasis. So this really isn't just an economic issue or an environmental issue. It's a real human rights issue that we see in India. We also have an activity where they could compare and contrast conflicts between indigenous peoples and mining efforts in other parts of the world. It's always so important when learning about any country, but especially a country that's in the process of developing and it might seem quite different to your students, to really point out that these issues aren't necessarily unique to India. In fact, these are issues, the conflicts between resources and individual rights and environmental rights that we see right here in the United States with coal mines in the Navajo and Hopi land, and of course in China and other places around the world as they explore for rare minerals. And the final option here is to have students think a little bit closer to home and think about their own communities and the tensions that exist between economic development and environmental protection there. And not only thinking about what's going on today, but historically over the last few generations, in what ways has development and growth kind of come into conflict with human rights or environmental issues in their own communities. And I think students might be very interested to explore their histories in the past and find out that maybe we've dealt with some of these same issues that India is struggling with today. So that's the first exercise or the first activity. And the second one I think follows really nicely. It looks at energy consumption. So we're looking at getting those resources and getting the coal to produce energy. But in this next activity, we're not only moving away from the resource into how it's used, but we're also moving away from text-based primary sources into what we would call a visual text. And we'll be having students look at graphs and work on their analyzation skills. And in this activity, students compare and contrast energy consumption in the United States and India over the past 30 years. And more than just learning from the graphs, they'll be taking it a step further and thinking about what this implies about attitudes towards energy, attitudes toward consumption, and how and why energy is used in different parts of the world. So once again, you see these familiar resources, the primary source, the terms, the key questions, and of course the pre-learning activity. And the pre-learning activity in this activity asks students to think about their own consumption and how they use energy day to day. And so they'd be actually completing a consumption diary, and we have in that document section a template for them to complete. And in this one, they would be looking at what they have used. As you can see here, we're asking them what did they notice about their use and how could they modify or would they? And what differences exist against different students who have maybe used more or less, and what might prompt the differences in their attitudes towards consumption. And keeping in mind that this is just a microcosm of the larger world, and that just as their classroom has different socioeconomic, political, and ideological factors, so too does different people and countries around the world. And that's a great way for them to start thinking about the differences in energy consumption in the United States and India over the past 30 years, which takes us right into the primary source activity. And as I said, for this activity, students will take a look at visual resources, so look at graphs, and they'll be looking at 3 of them. I'll just show you a couple of them here. The first one they'll look at shows total per capita energy and consumption in India over the past 30 years. The second one is very similar, but we'll look at energy consumption in the United States. And the third one will actually compare total and per capita energy consumption in India and the United States. So this information is all available on one graph. And like all the other resources required for Primary Source World, you'll be able to access these by downloading the handouts in the document section on the left-hand side of the page here. What's great is as these students read the graphs, not only are they mining them for the data that they need to answer questions, but they're also just sharpening their visual literacy, and they're learning about graphs and how they're put together and scale, and really focusing on those skills that might be equated with a different type of classroom than the type of classroom that this would be taught in. So it's a great cross-disciplinary Common Core way to really dig into a rich primary source visual text, we would call it. So students would go through and look at those graphs, calculating how much energy is consumed per person and total in India and the United States, using formulas to calculate how much coal an average person in each country uses each year, and comparing and contrasting their findings for the United States and India. And as you can see in these prompts and the discussions here, they'll take it a step further, not only thinking about what they can tell from these graphs, but what other information they really need to better understand not only the graphs themselves and the data in them, but of course also what's behind the information in these graphs. What can we infer about Indian society, about changes in American society, about attitudes towards energy consumption, about the need for energy consumption, about industrialization? Really digging deeper and identifying those research questions that could take them for a next step to go out and find information that puts this information into context. So really working on multiple levels and multiple types of skills here. Once again, the extension activity provides some different ways that teachers might take that next step, considering the relationship between the graphs and different types of information. One way, again, if we don't want to look at this as just a US versus India issue, you can make this an even more nuanced conversation by having students examine total energy consumption trends of other rapidly developed or developing countries, looking at places maybe like China, Brazil, or Malawi. You can use the links here, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and have students not only find that data, but then create their own graphs and present their graphs and present their findings and discuss their inferences as they do so. Another option is that your students can learn a little bit more about climate change and how energy consumption, the use of fossil fuels such as coal and oil play into climate change, and the attitudes towards this issue both in the United States and in India, and of course in other parts of the world. And then the final activity in this 3-part cluster moves from energy resources, energy consumption, to a different aspect of environmental issues, and that's river pollution. And in general pollution, more specifically looking at the Ganges River in India. And I'm sure most of you who teach India and are familiar with this topic know the important role, both in terms of practical secular use and also spiritual religious use, that the Ganges River plays. And this activity will explore how pollution, in particular industrial pollution from canneries, affects the health of the river and the wildlife in it, as well as the health of the people who rely on the river every day. So again, we see these familiar parts of the activity, the background, the key question, the terms, the key documents over here, and the pre-learning activity. And this is the part of the webinar where I can tell that you've been sitting for quite a while listening, so I'm going to ask you to engage with me for just a little bit as I kind of give you a sample of what this particular pre-learning activity would look like. For this activity, we ask students to go on a gallery walk, and we provide the images right here in the document section for the gallery walk, as well as a gallery image key, and that provides you as the educator with a little bit more background information about what's actually happening in the images that students will see. But I'm going to pull these images up on the website, and I'm going to slowly scroll down through them. And I'd like you to kind of do what your students would do in this instance, and that is look at these images and share with us in the chat box what you noticed. And the particular things that students would be looking for, and they'd have a worksheet and a graphic organizer to help them do this, we'd be asking them to think about 3 things as they look at these images. So please share with us what you see in terms of how the river Ganges is used by Indians, what's its purpose and what way do people interact with it, what types of pollution do you see, and what might be the effects of this pollution. So again, I'm just going to scroll through, and of course in an actual gallery walk, I would hope that you would give your students more than these few seconds I'm providing for you to take a look at the images. But again, just share in that box, and Jennifer will kind of field those responses. What do you see? How is the Ganges River used? For what purposes? What types of pollution might you see? And what would you expect the effects of this pollution to be?
Liz, can you pause on one of the pictures so we can just have a minute to look at it?
Oh, sure. You can pause on each of them. So again, what are you seeing? How does it seem that people use the river? What types of pollution do you see? And what might you anticipate the effects of that pollution to be? Either on the river, on the wildlife in the river, on the environment around the river, or on the people who do use this river on a regular basis, many of whom use it every day. And all of these images we have links to. Most of them are from Wikimedia Commons. We do have a few that participants on the primary source study tour shared with us, like this one by Bethan Jones.
Liz, since you can't see the chat box, I'll jump in and just read some of the things that are being said there.
That'd be great, thank you.
So Mike said we see that the river is being used by a lot of people, very colorful pollution. Jesse mentioned that we're seeing it being used for transportation. Mike also mentioned that we see a lot of building right up close to the river. Jesse mentioned human and industrial waste, bathing. Lana mentioned that we see a lot of trash in the river. And Andrew said it looks like it's a place where people collect, that there's a lot of people, many of them are not facing the water in that first picture. And Jesse mentioned that the fish flora and fauna would be affected by the pollution. Alka mentioned that it's being used for praying, bathing, washing, commerce, ceremonies, religious rituals like funerals. Jesse also mentioned that humans would be susceptible to waterborne diseases.
Absolutely. These are all exactly the type of responses that we would hope to get from students completing this activity, recognizing that the river Ganges and many rivers in India are used both for secular and for religious purposes, for practical everyday concerns, as well as for more ritualistic reasons, and that the pollution takes many forms: human waste, animal waste, industrial waste. There are a lot of different things happening in these images. And again, I would certainly give students more time, and then I would go through with that key that we've provided and actually give them the chance to learn what really is happening in each of those images. But the goal of this, and as you can kind of see, is to really get students to start thinking about the importance of the Ganges River, and both modern times and also traditionally, and then to jump from there to the primary source activity that will actually dig a little bit deeper into one of the causes of river pollution, which is industrial pollution, as well as its effects both on human and on the environment. So moving from the pre-learning activity to the primary source activity, you see here that participants or students will actually be watching a video, so a documentary in this case is used as the primary source, and they'll be using information from that documentary, from their gallery walk, and also from a background information handout to draw some conclusions about the causes and effects of pollution in the Ganges River. This activity, as I said, uses a documentary from the National Geographic, and in the video, it details how the tanneries in a town called Kanpur dump toxic waste into the Ganges, which obviously affects both the river and the human health. And this video comes from a series of National Geographic videos, and they're all short, 5 to 8 minutes maybe, and they address different issues. So you could also maybe after the gallery walk even show them a different video that talks about the spiritual and practical nature of the Ganges if they thought they needed that extra context. But basically, after watching this video and considering the information that they gained from the gallery walk, looking at that informational text of background information, students will discuss using a series of questions, either think, pair, share, or as a full group. They'll discuss the causes and effects of the India's river pollution and think about what's being done and what could be done to address it. As a final reflection, we decided to include a writing activity here so that students in the last activity were thinking about verbalizing their concerns and reaching a compromise, and in this one they're using a written, persuasive, or informational paragraph. And they'd have a choice of either explaining the biggest challenge that industrialization presents for the Ganges River and the people that depend on it, or after watching that video on the tanneries and how they affect the Ganges River and the Ganges River health, they could either do the informational text or they could create a persuasive paragraph in support or against closing the river or closing the tanneries that are dumping these materials into the river. And again, like some of the other activities, this one really includes a lot of options for the extension. We have them thinking about reading an article about what's going on today in terms of the tanneries and trying to clean up the river, pairing that with that information. They could create a public service awareness billboard, something that they could maybe think about putting up in Kanpur, creating knowledge and awareness of the effects of pollution in the Ganges River. Or again, going back to legislation and pairing a really challenging informational text with this documentary, you could look at India's National Environmental Policy from 2006 or the Water Act of 1974, and considering these acts, write a letter to the Prime Minister of India citing specific laws and regulations and explaining what should be done to help protect India's rivers. And finally, to again point out to students that river pollution and industrialization and the challenges come from it are not just an Indian issue. Students could do additional research about a river in the United States that's been affected and present their findings to the class, comparing and contrasting the American experience with the Ganges River experience. And I know that, for students who are in primary sources area of Boston, they don't have to look too far to find a river and harbor that has been recently the focus of a cleanup effort, and there are certainly cases like the Charles River throughout New England as well as the rest of the United States. So that is a lightning quick introduction to the activities in this Primary Source World Forum and the types of things we would be asking students to do as they explore these activities and as they increase their knowledge of what's going on in India. So let's see, I'm having some trouble with my speaker right now. There we go. I'll go ahead and come back to the PowerPoint, and at this time we'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions. The PowerPoint will pop up in just a little bit with some ideas about how you can share your questions, but again, you can keep typing those in using the text box that many of you have used for chatting with us and answering questions and sharing your great feedback throughout that gallery walk sample. Or you can raise your hand and we can address your questions after you speak them into the mic. So go ahead, Jennifer. I don't know if we have any questions that have come in that we should address, or if anyone has some that they'd like to pose to us now. See, I'm scrolling through right now to take a look at the different questions that have been asked.
Hi, Dan. Did you want to ask a question? It looks like your microphone's not working. If you want to type your question in the chat box, we can maybe answer your question that way. If there's any questions about additional book recommendations, other websites, we just skimmed the surface of the resources that we have today. And I know, you know, since this is for secondary, I know we have some 6th grade teachers on the line. You know, book recommendations, definitely the first 2 that I talked about. There's also Sita's Ramayana, which is a graphic novel version of the Ramayana that would be perfect for 6th grade if you're looking for those kinds of resources. So Liz, there's a question in the chat box. Teaching Hinduism to 8th graders can be a challenge because of this belief system is unique and foreign for many students. What resources would you recommend for connecting and personalizing Hindu beliefs for a middle schooler?
Here we go, I'm back. I was having trouble connecting there for a moment. That's a great question, and I'll do some thinking about specific resources and share those in the chat box. But I will say something to a framework for addressing Hinduism or other religions that might at first seem really different to your students. I used to teach 9th grade ethics and world culture course, and we talked about all different world religions. And I taught this in a classroom in Oklahoma City where most students were from a very similar background and had very little exposure to different religions or different cultures. So they were definitely intimidated by the idea of learning about Hinduism and Buddhism and some of the Eastern religions. So the way that we did it was kind of identifying key factors that you would find across all religions and using that as a starting point to examine any religion that we looked at. So we talked about how every religion has sacred texts, how every religion has rituals, and how every religion has a code of ethics. And with those 3 things, we drilled down into each religion so that despite the differences, we still had a great standard for comparing you know, the code of ethics as it presented itself in different cultures. Or if we said each culture had a belief system, what was that belief system and how was it similar to or different from other ones that we've looked at? Or the rituals. Every religion has rituals and they have rites of passage and they have daily rituals. So even though the specifics of the rituals might differ, it was really nice to my students to just have that anchor of, even though the specifics are different, there's this common feature that all religions have rituals, have systems of belief, have sacred texts, and have a code of ethics. And just having that to ground the study made it much more comfortable and approachable to students. I see that Jennifer has shared a specific resource, which is Houston Smith's The Illustrated World's Religions, and that's a great book. Houston Smith is kind of seen as you know, the foremost scholar on general religions, world religions, and I know that whenever I was studying world religions in college, we used, I can't even remember which version of Houston Smith's book, but it's a great resource to use. And I'll do a little thinking specifically about Hinduism and share those as well. I do know that there are lots of great videos available, short videos as well as longer documentaries that can make any world religion, but in particular Hinduism, which can seem a little complicated, a bit more accessible. And I think if you go to our South Asia Resource Guide, you'll find some links to some of those. But I'll do some thinking and also share with you some additional thoughts in the text box. And you're also welcome. I'll put my email address in here. And if you have any other questions after the webinar, I'm happy to send you some specific thoughts as well. Oh, Jennifer also just shared the Internet Ancient History Source Book. Has great primary sources if you're looking less for kind of general introduction text and more of a specific primary source to use with your students. that's a really great resource to use.
Yes, that was, we had a question about resources for internet, or for ancient history. Ramarino, that was in response to your question. The Internet Ancient History Sourcebook is from Fordham University. They also have a Modern History Sourcebook. They have an Indian History Sourcebook, actually. I'll put the link to that in there too, where you would also find great resources if you're looking at religions in India. I'm jotting down some of these questions because I know we're not going to be able to get to all of these. So if we don't get to your question, we will respond to you via email. And let's see. The one about E.M. Forster, a passage to India, and there's another one that I just saw. Oh, Tagore, classic novel. I'm going to get back to both of you because those are going to take more than 30 seconds to answer. So I've got your name written down. I will email you answers to those questions. One of the questions is about using a passage to India at the high school level. Has anyone on the webinar used a passage to India at the high school level? And is there anything you would want to comment on about using that with high school students? So Brian says he does teach a passage to India to junior honors students. So probably your more advanced readers, junior, senior level, could handle a passage to India. So Liz, do you want to go ahead and tell us what's coming up at Primary Source?
Sure, I thought my talk was on. I was just saying that a lot of these texts, even if they seem a little intimidating at first, we always have great experience whenever we use excerpts. And so, you know, a passage to India might not work in its entirety for your classroom, but using excerpts with that paired with different informational texts and different fiction might be a really great way to introduce a variety of resources from different time periods, and even comparing and contrasting different time periods using shorter text might be good. But yeah, I would love to go ahead and let you know, since we're running short on time here, some other things that are coming up at Primary Source that we think you might be interested in joining us for and hope to see you at. We have coming up at the end of this month, April 22nd from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m., another webinar with scholar Zach Morgan from Boston College. He'll be talking about race in Brazil, and that's another free webinar that you are welcome to join us for. I don't have the URL up, but we can put that up for you. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can just go to primarysource.org/online-courses, and I just put that URL up in the chat box. And you can sign up, register for that webinar, and again, that's one that if you can't make it to it in person, although we hope you can, we'd be happy to send you a recording to that webinar. And another thing that we'd like to put on your radars is that Primary Source's Summer Institutes are coming up. We have lots of face-to-face as well as online opportunities for earning PDPs or graduate credits, and you can sign up for that and explore topics, global topics such as human rights and the environment. You can focus on American-based topics, looking at the U.S. and the world for U.S. History 2 teachers. We have online courses looking at China, Japan, and teaching with primary sources. So I just encourage you, if you are interested in earning some PDPs or graduate credits and having a really great learning experience with scholars and teachers, to check out Primary Source's website, primarysource.org/Summer Institutes, and considering signing up for one of our online courses. And again, we'll put that URL in the chat menu in just a moment. We would also like to encourage you to keep up with what's coming up at Primary Source, not just through those 2 quick updates, but by becoming a fan of ours on Facebook, by following us on Twitter, or by visiting our website. And we do update our website as well as the Facebook and Twitter pages often with information not only about things that are happening about Primary Source, but also about programs and events happening that just might be of general interest to you. So please do follow us and keep track of what's going on to us using those social media options. Once again, we just want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We know it's a very busy time of year for everyone, so we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to learn more about primary source, and especially to learn about how you can take South Asia to your classrooms through literature and online resources. We would like to thank the South Asia Institute once again for making this webinar possible, and we really hope to see all of you either virtually or face-to-face in another primary source program sometime soon. Jennifer and I both welcome your questions via email, and we look forward to working with you again. Have a great evening and a great school year.